I'm so glad you're watching. Of course, I want you to subscribe. Why? Because we have amazing content. And hit the like button right now. Why? Because when you do that, YouTube says, ooh, this is popular, and other people will want to watch it. So hit like right now. That'd be super helpful. And we have a fantastic, amazing joke. We're doing that at the beginning now for a little difference there. A man was admitted to the hospital after swallowing 6 plastic horses. Now his condition has been described as stable. So stupid, I know, right? Only next week will be much better. However, we're continuing our series on conversations with Jacob. And don't forget, hit the like button right now, because that'll help promote our content. But Jacob had conversations with his immediate family. We talked about that last week with Rebecca, his mom, Isaac, his dad, Esau, his older twin brother. This week, we're going to look at the conversations Jacob had with his uncle, kind of extended family, and as well as how it relates to employment. Because when Jacob ran away from his immediate family, from Esau, he wound up living with his uncle, who basically gave him a job, employed him for about 20 years. And the conversations that Jacob had with Laban, his employer, were interesting conversations, because when Jacob first landed, he fell in love. Laban had 2 daughters, Rachel and Leah. Rachel was pretty, Leah was not. Jacob fell in love with Rachel, agreed to work for Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel. And that was a conversation. And sometimes when you have conversations with your employer or, maybe an extended relative, sometimes you make agreements and you think you know what you're getting into, but it may not always turn out that way, which is exactly what happened to Jacob. Because after Jacob worked for 7 years, it's time to marry Rachel. Then they do the wedding celebration. Jacob consummates the marriage. But when he wakes up in the morning, he's sleeping next to Leah, the ugly one. He's not happy. He's like, what's going on here? This is what we agreed to. And Laban, the employer, said, well, here in our country, the traditions here, and they go through these gyrations. So Jacob winds up working for another 7 years to marry Rachel. So he winds up 14 years to marry the woman he really, really loves. In the meantime, he's married to Leah, and they get a couple of concubines or whatever, maids that are in the mix as well. And Jacob starts having children. So again, hit the like button right now, because this is really good content. And after Jacob has like 10 kids, he works for like another 6 years for Laban, and Jacob winds up getting extremely wealthy. And by the time Jacob works for Laban for 20 years, they've had conversations. They've had conversations about his marriage, about the wealth, how it's going in terms of taking care of Laban's flock. And then Laban says to Jacob, I recognize that I'm prospering because God's blessed you. And so what would you like in order for you to stay and keep working for me? And Jacob makes his kind of terms and conditions, and they come to an agreement. And so there's an interesting dialogue that happens between Jacob and his employer. And some of it isn't always above board and doesn't always seem to work out according to Jacob's preferences and desires. But it's interesting, towards the end of that 20 years, it says that God speaks to Jacob and says, it's time to go home, time to go back to your homeland, to your home country. And Jacob recognizes, and it's interesting, he recognizes that Laban's sons aren't looking favorably on Jacob. And Jacob talks with his wives, and they say, no, we're fine. We can move because Dad cut us loose a long time ago. And so when Jacob hears from God, he sees some external confirmations of God's saying, hey, it's time to move. And Jacob makes steps to comply with God's directives, even though it's not always in agreement with his employment. And so I think when we think about some takeaways, and of course hit the like button, because this is really good content and it'll help you and give you some application. There's some takeaways for this, that we follow God's guidance and leading in our lives. no matter if it's a family scenario, no matter if it's an employment scenario. And, I think Jacob in his mind, maybe when God spoke to him, maybe Jacob thought, last time I was home, Esau was, wanting to kill me, threatening to kill me. That's why I ran away in the first place. So I'm not sure that I want to go back there, and I don't know what's happened with mom and dad. You can run these scenarios, but ultimately I think the takeaway for us is that we follow God. Follow God no matter what he tells us to do, and no matter what that looks like for our employment, no matter what that looks like for our families, no matter what the conversations might be, that we stay true to what God has told us to do and put inside of us. So I think it's a really helpful reminder. You're like, well, I already know that. Yeah, but I don't know that we always do that. Sometimes I think we make decisions based on what's comfortable and convenient, and not always based on the obedience of what God's putting in our hearts. So here's a question for you. I would like you to answer this question. What would be your dream job? Answer that in the comments right now, because that'll help have some engagement. Plus, of course, hit the like button, because really good content. And finally, thank you for subscribing. This is a great series and fun to explore these conversations with Jacob. Catch you next week.